In essence, it's because I'm terrified of the impacts of the breakdown of our climate on people's health, safety and well-being. And I don't see anyone else acting in a proportionate way to stop the harm that's coming. With XR, because I'm desperate to do something, and it's the best way for me to do something. It's like there's a patient that's collapsed in the waiting room and you see them collapsed and the patient's family are screaming, asking for help, saying, what's happening? And the doctor says, I'll be with you after lunch, just going on my lunch break, you know. No one's responding to this emergency. Like, what should be happening is we should be wheeling that patient into the emergency room, dialing 2222, crash call, get every consultant, every able and willing hand to come down and support and save this person's life. You know, give them resuscitation, give them fluids, oxygen. And instead we're giving them a packet of paracetamol and saying, come back next week, you know, come back in 2045, we'll have the answer for you then. You know, as a doctor, I know that emergencies need rapid and proportionate treatment. You know, this is an emergency and no one's treating it like one. And so yes, I'm with XR. I wish I didn't have to be with XR. You know, we have a government that has a duty of care to support the health and safety of British people. And they're failing, and as a result, I guess, yeah, it was weird joining XR because the rebellion was a big step, you know. There's like, oh, I'm protesting, I'm campaigning, but rebellion was a big step, you know, realizing that the government in action is imposing a death sentence on me and everything I care about. It's like an abuser. You know, if someone's abusing you, you distance yourself from them, you stop consenting to that. You might be able to stop consenting to that. And in the same way, like, I've withdrawn my consent from a system which is killing me and everything I care about. So yeah, that element of rebellion is something that took me a bit of time to kind of grow towards. Initially, I didn't want to get too involved. I thought extinction and rebellion were both words which were a bit too extreme for me. So I wanted to support activists with in their well-being. I thought these are activists that are going to be burning out. I've burnt out a couple of times before, so I wanted to support their well-being. So I wanted to run mindfulness and meditation courses and support activists doing what they're doing. So I supported their well-being, and then I became one of them as the truth just dropped deeper and deeper and deeper within me. So I was working in A&E part-time, and I was interested in moving into preventative healthcare, because in A&E you're essentially dealing with the failings of a society that has not been able to contribute to good physical and mental and emotional health. And I was tired of it, so I wanted to go into preventative healthcare. So I was freeing up a bit of time for myself, and I was also interested in being a global health doctor. So I wanted to go to Calais and help out with the refugee crisis there. And as I was ready to go to Calais and starting to apply, a doctor said to me, Vishal, why do you want to go to Calais? I gave him a little answer, and he said, only a sadistic doctor wants to work in Calais. If you really cared about people suffering, then you would be trying to stop the causes of the refugee crisis, which is leading to this humanitarian disaster in the first place. And he said, stay where you are and stop the climate crisis. And he told me this fact from the UN Refugee Agency, which is they predict that by 2050 there will be 1 billion climate refugees. Now, the refugee crisis that led to the migrants in Calais is a result of about 5 to 10 million. So we're talking about 100 times that number of people. And that number stuck around in my head, but then the stories of the individuals that would be those statistics start to drop in. People don't just leave their homes, they leave because of starvation, because of natural disasters, because the environment they're in is not conducive to life. And that statistic of 1 billion doesn't take into account the number of people that are left behind. And that started to horrify me. And then there was this like kind of this complacency that, oh, of course the migrants will be coming into England or into Britain. We don't know if we'll be the ones trying to get out, you know. And when that happens, like what could happen? You know, what really frightened me wasn't extinction. It wasn't extinction. I'm not even worried about like natural disasters affecting you know, us. Like my friend said, like, I'm happy to die in a hurricane or a tornado, but the thing that scares me is when people turn against each other because there's no food, you know. There's a study done in Rwanda around the genocide that looked at calorific intake versus violence. And when calorific intake was, I think, less than 600 or maybe it was 1600 calories per day, there was a marked increase in the amount of violence that was there. You know, we don't know what will happen when we don't have food on the table. We're already seeing that we're getting food shortages in this country. You know, floods and freak weather events are happening more frequently, and they're affecting the food systems in this country now. And that's what frightens me, is people turning on each other in the face of crisis. Yeah. It's worse than you think. If it's not going to be as bad as we think, there's a pretty good chance it will be. And is that chance worth it, you know? If we could see, what was that statistic? There's a, I think it's a 30% chance. Let's go conservative. They said if there's a 10% chance, so there's a 10% chance that we'll reach 7 degrees of warming. Right? 7 degrees of warming is like just decimation. Life cannot survive with 7 degrees warming. There's 10% chance. If you have a 2% chance of having cancer, you'll be swept into hospital immediately and given, within 2 weeks, you'll be given investigations to find out if you have cancer so we can treat you to try and save your life. If there's that risk, you know, we have to be acting to prevent that great harm from happening. And what's the worst that would happen? You know, we have a beautiful world to show for it. We really don't have anything to lose. So I think this is what I'd like to say to them, actually. Yeah, the chance of harm is really, really high, and the harm that will come will be really, really catastrophic. And it may seem daunting that we're asking for massive changes. Like the changes that we're asking people to make are huge changes. But look at your life, look at how you're living your life right now. Are you happy? Like, are you truly happy? Do you feel like you're living your life to meet human potential? And you look at people around you, like who's suffering as a result of the way we're living our lives? What we're asking people to do to respond to this crisis will make a beautiful world for all human beings and all nature. Whether it saves us from crisis or we still experience climate change and climate breakdown, we're still going to be creating a beautiful world together. And this isn't some like hippie fairyland. I'm talking like very basically the way in which we live our lives could be just so much more beautiful. So yeah, it may seem daunting, it may seem scary, it may seem like a big ask, but it will take us to a more beautiful world. We're in a really fortunate position in this country at the moment. And that fortunate position is that we have a choice. Right now we have a choice to voluntarily engage with what 99% of scientists are saying is happening. There'll be a time when we won't have a choice and it'll be forced upon us. So whilst we have an abundance of food, whilst we have good supply of energy, and we have shelter that can look after us, we need to be preparing ourselves for times when we won't have that. And that's not just like hoarding food and buying land and stealing resources from around the world. No, it's learning those emotional skills and qualities that will allow us to stay joyful throughout whatever happens, to stay connected and compassionate in the face of disaster. We have to start running like thought experiments, like what would we do if there was half the amount of food in the cupboard? Who would go without? What if we didn't have medical supplies? How do we run a healthcare service without medical supplies? And the important thing here is that we're already vulnerable. You know, I found out the other day that in the last 6 months to October, 2/3 of all pharmacies said they had shortages in all major drug categories, and the British government put a ban on exports of 4 major drugs around the world. You know, what happens when we're vulnerable? We close our borders, we look inwards. What if other people do that as well? You know, we're already fragile and vulnerable. You know, everything arrives just in time. We don't have that resilience, and so just a few shocks, a few changes, and we could see things rapidly different. So we're already vulnerable. So we need to start running these thought experiments. What are we going to do? How are we going to behave with each other? How are we going to interact with each other? And how can we cultivate those skills now, whilst we still have the chance to do it? Because once the fear sets in, we revert back to old habit patterns, and this society hasn't trained us to have very healthy interpersonal habit patterns. Yeah. Politicians are trying to convince us that they're going to save the NHS and save healthcare. But if you care about healthcare in this country, then you have to be dedicated to stopping the climate crisis. Doctors are petrified of what it means to be a doctor in the face of collapse. We don't know what to do. You know, we just don't know what to do. And we're not prepared for it. So this isn't like, oh, do I care about climate change or not? Do I care about climate crisis or not? Do I care about biodiversity loss or not? No, it's nothing to do with that. It's about the health of you, of your family, and everyone in this country and around the world. You know, it comes down to that. So it's not like NHS or this issue. This swamps everything.